Marcus Wellington III stepped out of his black Bentley Mulsanne, the leather soles of his handmade Italian shoes clicking against the ancient cobblestones of Windsor Castle's courtyard. The October morning air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of autumn leaves and centuries of British history. At 42 years old, Marcus had everything money could buy: a tech empire worth $3 billion, mansions on 3 continents, and an ego that had grown proportionally with his bank account. His driver, a quiet British man named Charles, hurried around to close the door behind him. Marcus barely acknowledged the gesture, his attention focused entirely on the imposing medieval walls before him. This wasn't just any tourist visit. Marcus had paid an astronomical sum for a private tour of Windsor Castle, complete with exclusive access to areas typically closed to the public. Money, after all, opened every door. "Mr. Wellington, welcome to Windsor Castle." A pleasant woman in a navy blue suit approached him, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, your personal guide today. We're honored to have you here." Marcus shook her hand briefly, his grip firm but dismissive. "Let's get started. I don't have all day." His American accent was sharp, cutting through the morning air like a blade through silk. As they walked toward the entrance, Marcus couldn't help but notice the tourists gathered behind velvet ropes, their cameras flashing as they tried to capture glimpses of the castle's exterior. A smirk played across his lips. While they stood there like cattle, he was about to walk through the front door as if he owned the place. In his mind, his money essentially made him royalty. The tour began in the state apartments, where Sarah explained the history of each room with practiced enthusiasm. Marcus half listened, more interested in calculating the worth of the priceless artifacts surrounding him. A Van Dyck painting here, a Chippendale chair there. Everything had a price tag in his mind, even if it would never be for sale. "This particular tapestry was woven in the 16th century, Sarah was saying, gesturing toward an enormous wall hanging that depicted a hunting scene. "It's considered one of the finest examples of—" "How much would something like this cost today?" Marcus interrupted, running his fingers along the golden frame. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Well, sir, these pieces are priceless cultural artifacts. They're not really valued in monetary terms." "Everything has a price," Marcus stated flatly. "Everything." They continued through the castle, Marcus's behavior becoming increasingly inappropriate. He touched things he wasn't supposed to touch, demanded access to areas that were clearly restricted, and made loud comments about how he could buy this whole place if he wanted to. Other visitors on nearby tours began to stare, some pulling out their phones to record the spectacle of the rude American billionaire. It was in the grand reception room where Marcus first spotted him. Standing at attention near the far wall was one of the Queen's Guard, a young man in the iconic red tunic and tall black bearskin hat. His name was James Crawford, though Marcus didn't know it at the time. James was 26 years old, a career soldier who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for this prestigious position. He stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead, embodying the discipline and dedication that the Queen's Guard was famous for worldwide. Marcus noticed James immediately, not out of respect, but out of amusement. Here was someone who was paid to stand motionless like a statue, a living decoration for tourists to gawk at. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Here he was, worth billions, while this man probably made less in a year than Marcus spent on a single dinner. "Those guards," Marcus said loudly to Sarah, pointing directly at James. "They're not allowed to move, right? No matter what." Sarah's discomfort was evident. "The Queen's Guard are highly trained soldiers, sir. They maintain their position as part of their duty, but they are real people deserving of respect." "But they can't move, right?" Marcus pressed, his voice carrying across the room. Several other tourists turned to look, sensing something uncomfortable was about to happen. "Sir, perhaps we should continue with the tour," Sarah suggested diplomatically. Marcus wasn't listening. An idea had formed in his mind, the kind of cruel idea that rich men sometimes got when they forgot that their money didn't make them gods. He walked directly toward James, his expensive shoes echoing off the ancient stone floors. "Hey there, statue boy," Marcus called out as he approached. James didn't react, his training keeping him perfectly still despite the growing tension in the room. "I heard you guys aren't allowed to move no matter what. Is that true?" "Silence." Marcus circled around James like a predator studying its prey. "You know, where I come from, people show respect when they're being spoken to. But I guess when you're paid to be a decoration, manners don't matter." The other tourists in the room began to whisper among themselves. Some looked horrified, others fascinated by the drama unfolding before them. Sarah hurried over, trying to intervene. Mr. Wellington, please, this is highly inappropriate. The guard are not part of the tour. Marcus held up his hand to silence her, never taking his eyes off James. I'm just curious about British military discipline. In America, we respect our soldiers by actually paying them well. Here, you dress them up like toy soldiers for entertainment. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he remained statue still. His training was absolute. No matter what happened, no matter what was said, he would not break protocol. But, inside, a fire was beginning to burn. Tell me, soldier, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Do you enjoy being a tourist attraction? Standing here while people take selfies with you like you're some kind of museum exhibit? A small crowd had gathered now, phones held high, recording what was quickly becoming a viral moment. Marcus was too caught up in his own performance to notice or care. This was entertainment for him, a way to flex his power and superiority over someone who couldn't fight back. I bet you dream about having real money, Marcus went on, pulling out his wallet. It was made of crocodile leather and stuffed with $100 bills. Look at this. This is more cash than you probably make in 6 months. He waved the money in front of James's face. Want to know what real success looks like? Sarah was speaking urgently into a radio now, calling for security, but Marcus was lost in his own little world of cruelty. He had found the perfect victim, someone bound by duty and protocol to endure whatever abuse he chose to dish out. You know what? I feel sorry for you, Marcus declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. Standing here in your fancy costume, pretending to be important, when really, you're just a minimum wage actor in the world's most boring play. That's when Marcus made his first serious mistake. Emboldened by James's inability to respond, he reached out and tapped the guard's chest with his finger. Once, twice, 3 times, each tap becoming more aggressive. Hello? Anyone home in there? Marcus laughed at his own cruelty. Or are you as empty as you look? James's breathing deepened slightly, his nostrils flaring with controlled rage. Every instinct in his body screamed to react, to defend his honor and the honor of his uniform. But his duty was absolute. He was a Queen's Guard, and Queen's Guards did not break. Marcus, interpreting the lack of response as weakness rather than incredible strength, decided to push further. He began walking around James again, this time bumping into him slightly with each pass. Excuse me, he said mockingly after each bump. Oh, sorry, didn't see you there. You blend in with the decorations so well. The crowd of onlookers was growing larger. Some were laughing uncomfortably, others looking disgusted by Marcus's behavior. But no one intervened. This was a billionaire American businessman, after all. What could they do? Marcus pulled out his phone and began taking selfies with James in the background, making exaggerated faces and poses. This is going on my Instagram, he announced. My followers are going to love this. Me with Britain's most expensive garden gnome. It was then that Marcus noticed something that excited him even more than his cruel game. James's hands, which had been perfectly still at his sides, were now trembling almost imperceptibly. Not from fear. Marcus was too self-absorbed to recognize the difference, but from the massive effort it was taking James to control his natural human responses. Oh, would you look at that? Marcus exclaimed with delight. I think I'm getting to him. The statue is starting to crack. This drew even more attention from the crowd. Phones were everywhere now, capturing every moment of Marcus's performance. He was completely in his element, feeding off the attention and the power he felt over another human being. Come on, soldier boy, Marcus taunted, now standing directly in front of James, their faces less than a foot apart. Show me what you've got. Or are you too scared to move? Too weak. James stared straight ahead, his blue eyes focused on a point somewhere beyond Marcus's shoulder. Inside his mind, he was reciting his oath, reminding himself of his duty, holding onto the iron discipline that had been drilled into him through years of military training. Marcus interpreted this as submission, which only encouraged him further. He began making faces at James, sticking out his tongue, crossing his eyes, anything to provoke a reaction. The crowd watched in a mixture of fascination and horror as one of America's wealthiest men made a complete fool of himself. You know what your problem is? Marcus said, his voice taking on a philosophical tone. You've been trained to be nothing. A nobody. A decoration. While men like me conquer the world, men like you stand in corners looking pretty. Sarah finally returned with security, but they were hesitant to intervene with such a high-profile visitor. Marcus had paid an enormous sum for this private access, and the castle's management was caught between protecting their staff and avoiding an international incident. Sir, one of the security guards said politely. Perhaps we could continue the tour in another area. Marcus waved him off. I'm not done here. I'm conducting a scientific experiment. I want to see exactly how much abuse this tin soldier can take before he breaks. This was when Marcus made his second serious mistake. Feeling completely untouchable, he reached out and flicked James's ear with his finger. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. James's head snapped toward Marcus with lightning speed, his eyes blazing with a fury that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. For just a moment, the mask of perfect control slipped, and everyone in the room saw the warrior beneath the ceremonial uniform. But then, with incredible force of will, James pulled himself back. His head returned to its forward-facing position, his expression smoothed out, his hands unclenched. The moment of near-breaking passed like a storm cloud. Marcus, however, had seen that flash of humanity, that crack in the armor, and it excited him like nothing else. There it is, he shouted triumphantly. I knew there was a real person under all that fake military bullshit. The crowd began to murmur more loudly now. Some were calling for Marcus to stop, others were booing. But Marcus was too intoxicated by his own power to hear them. He had found James's breaking point, and now he wanted to exploit it. Oh, you didn't like that, did you? Marcus laughed. What are you going to do about it? Report me to your commanding officer? Tell him the mean American hurt your feelings. James closed his eyes for just a fraction of a second, centering himself. When he opened them again, his gaze was steady and forward-facing. But something had changed. Where before there had been professional detachment, now there was something much more dangerous, cold, calculating patience. Marcus, completely misreading the situation, took this as encouragement to continue. You know what? I like you. You've got spirit under all that robot training. Tell you what, when you get off duty, come find me. I might have a job for you. Something where you can actually use your brain instead of just standing around looking decorative. He pulled out his business card and tried to stuff it into James's uniform pocket. James couldn't move to stop him, couldn't protest, couldn't defend himself from this violation of his person and his dignity. Marcus Wellington III, CEO of Wellington Tech. Marcus read from his own card with mock formality. You can thank me later for giving you a chance at a real career. The security guards were looking increasingly uncomfortable, but Marcus had them over a barrel. He was a paying customer, technically not breaking any laws, and politically connected enough that forcibly removing him could cause serious problems for everyone involved. Sarah made one final attempt at damage control. Mr. Wellington, I believe we've seen enough of this area. Perhaps we could move on to the Queen's doll's house? It's quite fascinating, and I'm not finished here. Marcus cut her off. I'm having too much fun with my new friend. That's when Marcus made his third and most serious mistake. Drunk on power and attention, he reached out and adjusted James's hat, tilting it slightly to one side. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Even the tourists who didn't understand the full significance of the Queen's Guard knew that touching the uniform was crossing a major line. James's entire body tensed like a coiled spring. His breathing became deeper, more controlled. His hands, still at his sides, clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles went white. Marcus, either not noticing or not caring about the reaction he'd provoked, admired his handiwork. There, that looks better. More casual. You were looking too uptight before. He stepped back to take another selfie with the improved guard, but, as he raised his phone, something in James's posture made him pause. There was a stillness about the young soldier now that was different from before. More focused. More dangerous. What's wrong, soldier boy? Marcus asked, but, for the first time, there was a slight uncertainty in his voice. Cat got your tongue? James said nothing, did nothing, but something in the air had changed. The other tourists felt it too. The atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable entertainment to something much more serious and potentially explosive. Marcus, however, was too drunk on his own power to recognize the danger signs. Instead of backing down, he doubled down on his cruelty. I get it now, he said with cruel insight. This uniform isn't just a job for you, is it? This is all you have. All you are. Without it, you're just another nobody from nowhere with no money and no prospects. He began circling James again, his voice growing louder and more vicious with each step. Let me guess, you grew up poor, didn't you? Probably some little council flat somewhere with parents who clean toilets for a living. This uniform is the first time in your pathetic life that anyone has ever shown you even fake respect. The crowd was getting restless now. Several people were shouting at Marcus to stop, but he was beyond reason, beyond common decency. He had found someone he could hurt without consequences, and he was going to milk it for all it was worth. You know what the beautiful thing is? Marcus continued his monologue of cruelty. After I leave here, you'll still be standing in this same spot tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. While I'm flying back to my penthouse in Manhattan, you'll still be here, playing dress-up soldier for the next tourist who wants to take pictures with the dancing monkey. James's jaw was working now, muscles twitching beneath his skin as he fought to maintain control. Every word Marcus spoke was like a physical blow, designed to strip away his dignity piece by piece. Marcus leaned in closer, lowering his voice so only James could hear. The really sad part is, you actually believe this matters. You think standing here in your little costume makes you important. But you and I both know the truth. You're nothing but a tourist attraction. A living, breathing theme park exhibit. That's when James did something unexpected. He spoke. It was barely a whisper, so quiet that only Marcus could hear it. But the words were crystal clear. You have no idea what you've just done. Marcus blinked in surprise. After nearly an hour of complete silence, the last thing he expected was for James to actually speak. But rather than being warned off by the ominous tone of the words, Marcus was delighted. "Oh, it talks," he exclaimed loudly, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have achieved a breakthrough. The toy soldier has learned to speak." He turned back to James with renewed enthusiasm. "What did you say, Tin Man? Something about what I've done? What could I possibly have done except expose you for what you really are?" James had returned to complete silence, but something fundamental had changed. Where before his stillness had been professional discipline, now it was the stillness of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Marcus, completely oblivious to the shift in dynamics, decided to go for what he thought would be the killing blow. "You want to know what I've done? I've shown everyone in this room that the famous Queen's Guard are just minimum-wage actors playing pretend. I've proven that all your fancy traditions and military bullshit are just tourist theater." He pulled out his phone again and began recording a video. "This is Marcus Wellington III, and I want everyone to see what the British consider their elite military. Watch this." He reached out to adjust James's hat again, but this time something different happened. As his hand approached, James's eyes shifted, just slightly, just enough to make direct eye contact with Marcus for a split second. What Marcus saw in those eyes made him freeze mid-motion. It wasn't anger, wasn't rage, wasn't even hatred. It was something much more terrifying, absolute certainty. The look of a man who had just made a decision that could not be unmade. For the first time since arriving at the castle, Marcus felt a flutter of genuine unease. There was something about that look, something that reminded him suddenly that beneath the ceremonial uniform was a trained soldier who had seen real combat. But the moment passed quickly, and Marcus's ego reasserted itself. He was a billionaire American businessman in one of Britain's most important tourist destinations. What could possibly happen to him here? "That's what I thought," he said, trying to recapture his earlier confidence. "All bark and no bite. Just like I said, a tourist attraction with delusions of grandeur." James returned to his forward-facing position, but now Marcus could see something that he hadn't noticed before. James wasn't just standing at attention, he was memorizing. Every word Marcus had spoken, every insult, every violation of dignity and protocol. It was all being cataloged and stored away for future reference. But Marcus was too caught up in his own performance to notice. He had an audience, he had a helpless victim, and he had the intoxicating power that came from knowing he was untouchable. "You know what?" Marcus announced to the crowd. "I'm going to make this interesting. I'm going to give Soldier Boy here a chance to earn some real money." He pulled out a thick wad of cash from his wallet, easily several $1,000s worth of $100 bills. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he began dropping the money on the floor around James's feet. "All you have to do is pick it up," Marcus said with mock generosity. "Just bend down and collect your pay. More money than you'll make in the next 6 months, just lying there waiting for you." James didn't move, didn't even glance down at the money scattered around his feet. His discipline was absolute, his training complete. But the humiliation was devastating, and everyone in the room could feel it. "What's wrong?" Marcus taunted. "Too proud to take charity? Or are you just too stupid to understand that this is more money than your government will ever pay you?" That's when Sarah finally reached her breaking point. "Mr. Wellington, this has gone far enough. I must insist that we continue the tour elsewhere immediately." Marcus rounded on her with sudden fury. "I paid a fortune for exclusive access to this place, and I'll do whatever I damn well please. If I want to have a conversation with the help, That's my business. His voice had risen to a shout now, echoing off the ancient stone walls. The crowd of tourists had grown to nearly 50 people, all watching the spectacle with a mixture of fascination and disgust. You British are all the same, Marcus continued his rant. All ceremony and tradition and no substance. This guard, this castle, this whole charade. It's all just a performance for gullible tourists who don't know any better. He gestured wildly at James. Look at him, standing there like a statue while I drop money at his feet. Where's the pride? Where's the dignity? Where's the famous British backbone? James remained perfectly still, but those who looked closely could see that his chest was rising and falling more rapidly now. His breathing was becoming deeper, more controlled, the breathing pattern of someone preparing for physical action. Marcus, completely drunk on his own sense of power and superiority, decided to deliver what he thought would be the final humiliation. He took out his phone again and began live streaming on his social media accounts. Hey everybody, Marcus Wellington here, broadcasting live from Windsor Castle, where I'm getting a personal demonstration of British military might. As you can see, it's pretty pathetic. He panned the camera across the scene, the scattered money, the crowd of horrified onlookers, and James standing at perfect attention despite the ongoing abuse. This is what passes for elite soldiers in Britain, Marcus told his online audience. I've been insulting this guy for the past hour, and he hasn't even twitched. Either he's incredibly disciplined or incredibly stupid. I'm betting on stupid. The number of viewers on his live stream was climbing rapidly as word spread across social media. Screenshots and video clips were already being shared thousands of times, turning Marcus's cruel performance into a viral sensation. You know what, folks? Marcus said to his online audience. I think our British friend here needs a lesson in American entrepreneurship. Let me show you how we motivate people in the real world. He ended the live stream and approached James one final time. The money was still scattered around the guard's feet, untouched and ignored. Last chance, soldier boy, Marcus said quietly. Pick up the money, or I'll make sure this video goes viral worldwide. Do you want to be famous as the British guard who was too proud to accept charity from his betters? James's response was to close his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, a meditation technique he'd learned during his military training. When he opened them again, his gaze was steady and forward-facing. But anyone looking closely would have seen something new in those blue eyes, a cold, calculating patience that spoke of consequences yet to come. Marcus waited a few more moments for a response that never came, then shrugged theatrically. Your loss, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. I tried to help you, but you're too stubborn to accept it. He began collecting the scattered bills, making a show of counting them. Well, more money for me, I guess. Not like I needed it anyway. As he stuffed the cash back into his wallet, Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. He had completely dominated the situation, demonstrated his superiority, and provided entertainment for his social media followers. In his mind, this had been a perfect morning. But as he turned to leave, he made one final mistake. Instead of simply walking away, his ego demanded one last gesture of dominance. He reached out and patted James on the shoulder with condescending familiarity. Thanks for the entertainment, soldier boy, he said with mock warmth. This has been fun. Maybe I'll come back tomorrow, and we can do it again. The pat on the shoulder was the final straw. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was a violation of protocol so severe that it could have resulted in disciplinary action for James if he had permitted it without consequences. But James did nothing, said nothing, didn't even flinch. Marcus walked away, trailing behind Sarah and the security guards who were eager to get him out of the area before things got any worse. The crowd began to disperse, many of them still filming and photographing the scene. But James remained exactly where he was, standing at perfect attention, staring straight ahead. To all outward appearances, nothing had changed. He was still the same disciplined, professional Queen's Guard he had been before Marcus Wellington III had walked into his life. Only now, something was different. Now, James Crawford had a mission that went beyond his official duties. Now he had a debt to collect. As the last of the tourists filed out of the room, James allowed himself one small, almost imperceptible smile. Marcus Wellington III had no idea what he had just started. The remainder of Marcus Wellington's tour passed in a blur of uncomfortable silence. Sarah Mitchell maintained her professional demeanor, but her enthusiasm had died completely. She guided him through the remaining rooms with mechanical efficiency, offering only the bare minimum of information required by her contract. The other staff members they encountered along the way had clearly heard about the incident. Their normally warm British hospitality was replaced by polite, but distinctly cool professionalism. Marcus, however, was oblivious to the change in atmosphere. He was still riding high on his perceived victory over the Queen's Guard, occasionally chuckling to himself as he replayed the scene in his mind. In his twisted worldview, he had struck a blow for American superiority, shown these stuffy British that their precious traditions meant nothing to a man with real power. Well, that was certainly educational, he announced as they reached the end of the tour near the castle's main exit. I've learned a lot about British character today. Sarah's smile was strained. I'm glad you found it informative, Mr. Wellington. Oh, I did. Very informative indeed. Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through the responses to his earlier social media posts. The video clips of his confrontation with James were already spreading across the internet like wildfire. My followers are absolutely loving this. I think I've given them a real insight into what your famous British military is really like. What Marcus didn't realize was that the viral spread of his videos was working against him in ways he couldn't imagine. While some of his American followers were indeed laughing along with his cruelty, the overwhelming response from British viewers was one of outrage and disgust. Comment sections were filling with condemnation of his behavior, and several influential British personalities had already begun sharing the videos with their own scathing commentary. More importantly, the videos had reached people with the power to do something about what they'd witnessed. At the headquarters of the Household Division in London, Colonel Margaret Thornberry was reviewing the footage with the expression of barely controlled fury. As the commanding officer responsible for all 5 regiments of foot guards, including the unit that provided guards for Windsor Castle, she took any disrespect toward her soldiers as a personal insult. Give me everything we have on this Marcus Wellington, she ordered her aide-de-camp. Full background check. I want to know where he's staying, how long he's in the country, and what other activities he has planned. Within an hour, she had a complete dossier on Marcus Wellington III. The information was both impressive and damning. Wellington Tech was indeed a major corporation with significant government contracts, including several with the British Ministry of Defence. Marcus himself was a regular visitor to the UK, with extensive business interests and political connections on both sides of the Atlantic. But all of that was about to become irrelevant. Colonel Thornberry had not risen to her position by allowing civilians to humiliate her soldiers without consequences. She reached for her secure phone and began making a series of very important calls. Meanwhile, Marcus had returned to his suite at the Savoy Hotel, London's most expensive accommodation. His penthouse suite overlooked the Thames and cost more per night than most people earned in a month. He was in his element here, surrounded by luxury and attended by staff who catered to his every whim. Charles, he called to his driver, who was also serving as his personal assistant during this trip. Set up the laptop. I want to hold a video conference with the board. They're going to love hearing about today's adventure. As Charles busied himself with the technical arrangements, Marcus poured himself a glass of 30-year-old scotch and settled into a leather chair that cost more than a car. He was still chuckling about the morning's events, completely unaware that his actions had set in motion a chain of events that would soon destroy everything he held dear. The video conference with Wellington Tech's board of directors went exactly as Marcus had anticipated. The 12 men and women who helped run his empire laughed appropriately at his story, congratulated him on his colorful handling of British pomposity, and moved on to discuss quarterly earnings projections. You know what? Marcus said as the meeting was winding down. I think I'm going to make this a regular thing. Every time I travel, I'll find some local stuffed shirt to deflate. Give people a reality check about what real power looks like. The board members chuckled and signed off one by one, leaving Marcus alone with his scotch and his sense of superiority. He spent the rest of the afternoon posting more content to his social media accounts, sharing photos of his luxury suite, and making casual references to his educational morning with British military intelligence. But while Marcus was congratulating himself on his wit and sophistication, James Crawford was going through the most difficult afternoon of his military career. After his shift ended at Windsor Castle, James had been summoned to an emergency meeting with his commanding officer, Major Timothy Hayes. The major was a career military man in his 50s, someone who had served in Northern Ireland, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He had seen real combat, real sacrifice, and real heroism. What he had witnessed on the viral videos filled him with a cold rage that his professional demeanor could barely contain. Guardsman Crawford, Major Hayes said as James stood at attention in his office. I've reviewed the footage of this morning's incident. I want you to know that you handled an impossible situation with exemplary discipline and professionalism." "Thank you, sir," James replied, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he was still processing. However, the major continued. "This incident has attracted attention from the highest levels. The colonel has been in contact with the Ministry of Defense, and there are political complications." James remained silent, waiting for his superior to explain. "Mr. Wellington's company has several significant defense contracts with Her Majesty's government," Major Hayes explained carefully. "His behavior today was inexcusable, but he is not without influential friends. There are those who would prefer this incident be quietly forgotten." The implications of this statement hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. James understood immediately that political and economic considerations were being weighed against military honor and personal dignity. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, guardsman?" the major asked. "I believe so, sir. The official position is that no formal action will be taken against Mr. Wellington." "That's correct. However," Major Hayes paused, choosing his words carefully, "the unofficial position is somewhat different. Mr. Wellington has humiliated not just you personally, but the entire household division. He has made a mockery of traditions that good men have died defending." James felt a flutter of hope in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "What are your orders, sir?" Major Hayes stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parade ground where young soldiers were drilling in preparation for ceremonial duties. "Your official orders are to return to your regular duties and forget this incident ever happened. However, I have been asked to inform you that you've been approved for 2 weeks of personal leave, effective immediately." The major turned back to face James, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of understanding between soldiers. "What you do with your personal time, guardsman, is entirely your own business. Should you choose to take a brief holiday, perhaps to visit London and see the sights, that would be perfectly understandable. A young man needs recreation after a difficult day." James understood perfectly. He was being given unofficial permission to take matters into his own hands, as long as he did so on his own time, and in a way that couldn't be traced back to the military. "I understand completely, sir. I believe a short break would be very beneficial to my mental health." "Excellent. And guardsman?" "Yes, sir. Whatever you might choose to do during your personal time, you should know that you have the full moral support of every man and woman in this regiment. Mr. Wellington may have powerful friends, but he has made powerful enemies as well." That evening, James returned to his small flat in Aldershot, but he didn't rest. Instead, he spent the night researching everything he could find about Marcus Wellington III. What he discovered was a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. A rich man who believed his wealth gave him the right to humiliate and abuse anyone he perceived as beneath him. There were stories from former employees about verbal abuse and impossible working conditions. There were accounts from service workers at high-end establishments who had been treated like property rather than people. There was even a sealed lawsuit from a waiter in New York who claimed Marcus had physically assaulted him for bringing the wrong wine. But, most importantly, James learned about Marcus's schedule for the remainder of his London visit. The billionaire had a packed agenda of business meetings, social events, and cultural activities. He would be moving through London's elite social circles, confident in his wealth and connections, completely unaware that he was being hunted. James had learned patience during his military service. He had spent weeks tracking insurgents through the mountains of Afghanistan, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He knew how to watch, how to wait, and how to plan. Most importantly, he knew how to be invisible when he needed to be. The next morning, Marcus Wellington began what he thought would be a typical day of business meetings and luxury shopping. He started with breakfast at Claridge's Hotel, where he met with several potential investors for his latest tech venture. The meeting went well. His reputation for ruthless success opened doors that remained closed to lesser men. After breakfast, he was driven to Savile Row for a fitting at Huntsman, the legendary tailor that had been clothing British gentlemen for over 150 years. Marcus had ordered 3 new suits during his previous visit to London, and today was the final fitting. "The shoulders are absolutely perfect, Mr. Wellington," the elderly tailor said as he made minute adjustments to the jacket. "I believe this may be some of our finest work." Marcus admired himself in the 3-way mirror, turning this way and that to appreciate the cut of the bespoke suit. At $8,000 per suit, they should be perfect. But, as he preened in the mirror, he had no idea that he was being watched from across the street. James Crawford sat in a coffee shop, dressed in civilian clothes, observing Marcus's every move through the tailor shop's large windows. He had been following the billionaire since early morning, learning his patterns, his routines, his vulnerabilities. What struck James most was how predictable Marcus was. He moved through his day with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. He was rude to shopkeepers, dismissive of his driver, and condescending to anyone he perceived as working class. But, most tellingly, he was completely oblivious to his surroundings. Marcus never checked to see if he was being followed. He never varied his routes or his timing. He announced his plans loudly on phone calls that anyone could overhear. He was the perfect target for someone with military training and infinite patience. After the tailor, Marcus visited his banker in the city of London, then had lunch at his club, an exclusive establishment where membership required both substantial wealth and social connections spanning generations. James couldn't follow him inside, but he didn't need to. He simply waited across the street, noting the exact time Marcus entered and estimating how long such a lunch would take. It was while Marcus was enjoying his 200-pound lunch that James made his first move. Charles, Marcus's driver, had parked the Bentley in a nearby garage and was grabbing a quick sandwich from a corner shop. He was a decent man who had been in service with wealthy families for over 20 years. He took pride in his professionalism and discretion, but he was also increasingly uncomfortable with his current employer's behavior. "Excuse me," James said, approaching Charles with a friendly smile. "You work for Marcus Wellington, don't you?" Charles immediately became wary. After yesterday's incident at Windsor Castle, he had been fielding calls from reporters and had been warned by the hotel concierge that protesters might try to target his employer. "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss my clients," Charles replied diplomatically. "Oh, I'm not a reporter," James assured him, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. "I'm the guard from Windsor Castle. The one your boss spent an hour humiliating yesterday." Charles's expression immediately changed from wariness to something approaching sympathy. I saw the videos. I'm very sorry about his behavior. It was completely inappropriate." "I appreciate that," James said sincerely. "And I want you to know that I don't hold you responsible for anything that happened. You were just doing your job." Charles relaxed slightly. This young man seemed reasonable, not at all the vindictive soldier he had been worried about encountering. "Is there something I can help you with?" Charles asked cautiously. "Actually, there is. I was hoping you might be able to tell me about Mr. Wellington's plans for tonight. Nothing classified, just general information. I'd like to know when he's planning to leave London." Charles hesitated. His professional instincts told him not to reveal information about his employer, but his human instincts told him that this young soldier deserved better than he had received yesterday. "He's attending a charity gala tonight at the Natural History Museum," Charles said finally. "It's a high-profile event, lots of celebrities and politicians. He's very excited about it." "What time does it start?" 7:30. "But, knowing Mr. Wellington, he'll want to arrive fashionably late. Probably around 8:15 or 8:30. James nodded thoughtfully. A charity gala would be perfect. Lots of people, lots of cameras, lots of witnesses to whatever happened. And the Natural History Museum was a public building with multiple entrances and exits. Perfect for someone who might need to disappear quickly. "Thank you," James said simply. "You've been very helpful." Charles watched the young soldier walk away and felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. He had the distinct feeling that he had just played a small part in something much larger than he understood. That afternoon, James continued his surveillance, following Marcus to meetings with his lawyers, then to a private viewing at an art gallery in Mayfair. Throughout it all, Marcus maintained his pattern of arrogant behavior, treating everyone around him as if they were his personal servants. But James was most interested in Marcus's security arrangements, or rather, the complete lack of them. Despite being worth billions of dollars and having made numerous enemies through his business practices, Marcus traveled with no bodyguards, no security detail, nothing but his elderly driver. He relied entirely on his wealth and connections to protect him, never imagining that someone might be planning to hold him accountable for his actions. As evening approached, James made his final preparations. He had rented a small flat in South Kensington, not far from the Natural History Museum, and had acquired several items that would be necessary for the night's work. Nothing illegal, nothing that couldn't be explained away if questioned, but everything needed to give Marcus Wellington III an education and consequences. At 7 o'clock, James positioned himself outside the museum, dressed in a black suit that made him look like just another guest or perhaps security personnel. The charity gala was indeed a high-profile event. He recognized several politicians and celebrities from the newspapers as they arrived in their expensive cars. The cause was children's education in developing countries, which made Marcus's presence particularly ironic. Here was a man who spent his days crushing the dreams of working-class people, attending an event supposedly dedicated to helping underprivileged children. At exactly 8:20, the Bentley pulled up to the museum's main entrance. Marcus stepped out, resplendent in one of his new Seville rose suits, and handed Charles the keys with his usual dismissive manner. He was accompanied by a young woman in an expensive dress, apparently his date for the evening, though James recognized her from his research as a professional escort who specialized in accompanying wealthy men to social events. Remember, Marcus was saying loudly enough for several other guests to hear, "We're only staying an hour. These charity things are boring as hell, but I need to be seen supporting good causes. It's good for business." The woman smiled and nodded, playing her role perfectly. She was being paid handsomely to make Marcus look good in public, and she was a professional at it. James followed them inside, maintaining a careful distance. The museum had been transformed for the evening. The main hall was filled with elegant tables, a string quartet was playing classical music, and waiters in white jackets circulated with champagne and canapes. Marcus immediately began working the room, introducing himself to influential guests, and making sure he was photographed with the right people. He was in his element here, surrounded by wealth and power, completely confident in his place at the top of the social hierarchy. But James was watching everything, noting every detail. He observed Marcus's drinking pattern. 2 glasses of champagne in the first 15 minutes, suggesting he was nervous despite his outward confidence. He noted how Marcus treated the wait staff, snapping his fingers for service, making demands without saying please or thank you, generally behaving like the entitled aristocrat he imagined himself to be. Most importantly, James identified all the exits and security measures. The museum had hired additional security for the event, but they were focused on keeping uninvited guests out, not monitoring the behavior of those who were already inside. It was when Marcus began telling the story of his Windsor Castle encounter to a group of amused socialites that James decided it was time to act. "And then," I said to this toy soldier, Marcus was saying, gesturing dramatically with his champagne glass. I said, "Do you enjoy being a tourist attraction?" The poor fool just stood there like a statue while I dropped money at his feet. The group around him laughed appreciatively, though several of the British guests looked uncomfortable. One elderly woman, James recognized her as Lady Victoria Pembroke, a prominent philanthropist, actually walked away in disgust. The whole thing was absolutely hilarious, Marcus continued, encouraged by his audience's attention. I completely humiliated him, and there was nothing he could do about it. That's the beauty of British military discipline. They're trained to take abuse like good little robots. James had heard enough. He approached the group slowly, his military bearing making him look like he belonged among the well-dressed guests. "Excuse me," he said politely, tapping Marcus gently on the shoulder. "I couldn't help but overhear your story. It sounds fascinating." Marcus turned around, his face flushed with alcohol and self-satisfaction. "Oh, it was brilliant. You should have seen this guard's face when I..." He stopped mid-sentence as he found himself looking into the steady blue eyes of James Crawford. For a moment, Marcus didn't recognize him. James looked very different in a well-tailored black suit compared to the red tunic and bearskin hat of the Queen's Guard uniform. But then, recognition dawned, and Marcus's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and, finally, a return of his characteristic arrogance. Well, Marcus said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Look what we have here. It's my friend from Windsor Castle. Did you come to thank me for making you famous?" The group around them had gone silent, sensing tension but not understanding its source. James maintained his polite smile, but there was something in his eyes that made several of the guests take an unconscious step backward. "Actually," James said in a voice that carried clearly across the surrounding area, "I came to return something you dropped yesterday." Marcus looked confused. "I didn't drop anything." "Oh, but you did," James replied, his smile never wavering. "You dropped your dignity, and I thought you might want it back." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Several more guests had noticed the exchange and were beginning to circle around, drawn by the obvious tension between the two men. Marcus's face began to redden, not from alcohol this time, but from anger and embarrassment. This was not how he had expected his evening to go. "Listen here, soldier boy," he said. his voice taking on the same condescending tone he had used at Windsor Castle. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but this is a private event for important people. You need to leave before I call security. Oh, I am important people, James replied calmly. In fact, I'm probably the most important person you'll meet tonight, because I'm the man who's going to teach you about consequences. The circle of onlookers was growing larger now. Several people had begun filming with their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. The string quartet continued playing, but their music seemed oddly disconnected from the growing drama in the center of the room. Marcus looked around at the crowd and realized that he was becoming the center of attention in exactly the wrong way. These were his peers, his business associates, his social equals. He couldn't afford to look weak or vulnerable in front of them. You're making a mistake, he said, trying to inject authority into his voice. Do you have any idea who I am? What I'm worth? I could buy and sell you 1,000 times over. Yes, James replied, his voice carrying a hint of steel beneath the politeness. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Wellington. You're the man who spent an hour yesterday trying to humiliate a soldier who couldn't fight back. You're the man who thinks money gives him the right to treat other human beings like property. The crowd was definitely paying attention now. Several of the guests recognized the reference to the Windsor Castle incident, which had become a viral sensation across social media. Phones were definitely recording now, and James could see the red lights of live streaming. But, most importantly, James continued, taking a step closer to Marcus. You're the man who's about to learn that some things in this world can't be bought. Marcus tried to back away, but found himself pressed against a tall display case containing museum artifacts. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely trapped and vulnerable. Security, he called out, his voice cracking slightly. Security. Oh, they're coming, James said calmly. But not for the reason you think. As if on cue, two men in dark suits approached the group. But instead of removing James, they flanked Marcus, showing identification that made the billionaire's face go pale. Mr. Wellington, one of them said formally, we're with Scotland Yard. We'd like to have a word with you about your immigration status. The two Scotland Yard detectives presented their credentials with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this countless times before. Detective Inspector Robert Hughes was a thin man in his 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His partner, Detective Sergeant Sarah Collins, was younger but equally professional, her notebook already out and ready. I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake, Marcus stammered, looking around desperately for support from the crowd of wealthy socialites. I'm here legally. I have all the proper documentation. I'm sure you do, sir, Detective Inspector Hughes replied calmly. However, we've received reports about your conduct yesterday at Windsor Castle that require investigation. There are questions about whether your behavior violated the terms of your visitor visa. The crowd around them had grown larger, with more phones appearing to record the unfolding drama. Marcus could see several faces he recognized, business associates, potential investors, social connections that had taken years to cultivate, all watching him being questioned by police like a common criminal. This is ridiculous, Marcus protested, his voice rising. I'm an American citizen. I have rights. Indeed you do, sir, Detective Sergeant Collins said, consulting her notebook. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say may be used in evidence. You also have the right to contact the American Embassy if you wish. The formal recitation of rights sent a chill through the crowd. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a potential arrest in progress. James watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. This wasn't his doing directly, but he had a feeling that Colonel Thornberry and her connections had found ways to make Marcus's visit to Britain much more complicated than anticipated. Now then, Mr. Wellington, Detective Inspector Hughes continued, perhaps we could discuss this matter in a more private setting? We have a few questions about your activities yesterday. I demand to speak to my lawyer, Marcus shouted, loud enough for the entire room to hear. This is harassment, political persecution. But, even as he protested, Marcus was beginning to realize the gravity of his situation. The British legal system was not the American legal system. Here, he was not the powerful businessman with unlimited resources and political connections. Here, he was just another foreign visitor who had potentially violated the terms of his stay. Of course, sir, Detective Sergeant Collins said. You're entitled to legal representation. However, the questions we need to ask are quite straightforward. Perhaps you could simply explain your conduct at Windsor Castle yesterday. Marcus looked around desperately, but the crowd of socialites who had been hanging on his every word minutes earlier were now backing away. Nobody wanted to be associated with someone being questioned by Scotland Yard, especially not in front of cameras that were broadcasting the scene live across the internet. His date for the evening, the professional escort, had already disappeared entirely. She was paid to make him look good in public, not to stand by him during police questioning. "This is about yesterday?" Marcus asked, trying to regain some composure. "That was just a bit of fun. Tourist banter. Surely you don't arrest people for talking to tour guides." "The Queen's Guard are not tour guides, Mr. Wellington," Detective Inspector Hughes said firmly. "They are active duty soldiers serving in an official capacity. Your conduct toward Guardsman Crawford has been reviewed at the highest levels, and there are serious concerns about your behavior." At the mention of James's name and rank, Marcus's eyes darted to where the young soldier stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. James met his gaze steadily, his expression neutral, but his eyes holding a promise of more consequences to come. "You see, sir," Detective Sergeant Collins continued, "when foreign visitors abuse British military personnel, especially in such a public manner, it raises questions about their fitness to remain in the country. The Home Office takes these matters very seriously." Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. In his arrogance, he had never considered that his actions might have legal consequences. He had assumed that his wealth and American citizenship would protect him from any serious repercussions. "Look, if I offended anyone, I apologize," he said, trying a different approach. "It was all just a misunderstanding. Cultural differences, you know. Americans are more direct than British people." "I see," Detective Inspector Hughes said, making notes. "So you're saying that in American culture, it's acceptable to physically touch military personnel without permission, to drop money at their feet as if they were beggars, and to livestream mockery of their service?" Each word was like a nail in Marcus's coffin. When his actions were described so clinically, they sounded even worse than they had seemed at the time. "No, of course not," Marcus backtracked. "I may have gotten carried away. But this doesn't warrant police involvement." "That's not for you to decide, sir," Detective Sergeant Collins replied. "The decision to investigate was made by people much higher up the chain of command than us." Indeed, the decision had been made at levels that would have astonished Marcus had he known. The viral videos of his behavior had reached not just military commanders, but government ministers who were embarrassed by the international attention being paid to the humiliation of a British soldier. More importantly, someone had done their homework on Marcus Wellington III. His business practices, his treatment of employees, his history of using wealth to avoid consequences. All of it had been compiled into a comprehensive file that painted a picture of a man who needed to be taught humility. "Now then," Detective Inspector Hughes said, "we're going to need you to accompany us to the station for formal questioning. This can be done voluntarily, or we can arrest you if you prefer." The crowd gasped collectively. Several phones captured the moment when Marcus Wellington III, billionaire tech mogul and self-proclaimed master of the universe, realized that his money couldn't save him from the consequences of his own arrogance. "This is insane," Marcus protested one more time. "I haven't broken any laws." "That remains to be determined, sir," Detective Sergeant Collins said. "There are several potential charges we need to discuss. Assault on military personnel, breach of the peace, violation of visitor visa conditions, and possibly hate crime legislation." James had to admire the thoroughness of the investigation. Someone had clearly been very creative in finding ways to hold Marcus accountable under British law. "Assault," Marcus squeaked. "I never assaulted anyone." "You made unwanted physical contact with a serving soldier, sir," Detective Inspector Hughes explained patiently. "You touched his uniform, adjusted his hat, and patted his shoulder without permission. Under British law, any unwanted touching can constitute assault." The legal explanation was being recorded by dozens of phones and broadcast live across social media. Hashtag Wellington Arrest was already trending on Twitter, with thousands of people sharing the videos and adding their own commentary about American arrogance abroad. Marcus looked around desperately for any support, but found none. The charity gala's other guests were either filming his humiliation or hurriedly leaving to avoid being associated with the scandal. His carefully cultivated image as a successful international businessman was crumbling in real time. "Fine," he said finally, his voice defeated. "I'll come with you. But this is going to cause a major diplomatic incident. My government won't stand for this treatment of an American citizen. I'm sure your embassy will be very interested in the circumstances," Detective Inspector Hughes agreed. "Shall we go?" As the detectives escorted Marcus toward the exit, James fell into step beside them. Marcus looked at him with a mixture of hatred and fear. "This is your doing, isn't it?" Marcus hissed. You couldn't handle being put in your place, so you ran crying to your superiors. James smiled for the first time that evening. Actually, Mr. Wellington, I didn't do anything except stand at my post and endure your abuse with dignity. But you're right about one thing. I couldn't handle it. Not the way you think, though. They had reached the museum's main entrance, where a police car was waiting. The scene was being recorded by news crews who had somehow learned about the incident and arrived to cover it. You see, James continued as the detectives helped Marcus toward the car. I couldn't handle knowing that you thought you had won. I couldn't handle the idea that you would go back to America thinking that British soldiers are weak and pathetic. So I decided to show you what real strength looks like. What do you mean? Marcus demanded, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Real strength, James explained, isn't about having more money than everyone else. It's not about being able to humiliate people who can't fight back. Real strength is having the patience to wait for the right moment, the intelligence to find your enemy's weakness, and the connections to make sure justice is served. As Marcus was helped into the police car, the full scope of what had happened began to dawn on him. This wasn't random police harassment or bureaucratic overreach. This was a coordinated response to his behavior, orchestrated by people with the power and patience to destroy him. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Marcus called out through the car window. I'll be out of this mess in an hour, and then I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me. James leaned down to the window, his voice quiet enough that only Marcus could hear. Mr. Wellington, you still don't understand what's happening to you. This isn't about one soldier's hurt feelings. This is about a whole country that's tired of watching rich Americans think they can treat British people like servants. The police car pulled away, carrying Marcus toward what would be the most humiliating night of his privileged life. But James wasn't finished with him yet. The arrest was just the beginning. The next morning, Marcus found himself in a holding cell in a police station in central London, wearing an orange jumpsuit and wondering how his life had gone so wrong so quickly. He had been questioned for hours about his behavior at Windsor Castle, forced to watch the viral videos of his own cruelty over and over again while detectives asked him to explain his actions. His lawyers had arrived eventually, expensive London barristers who cost more per hour than most people made in a month. But even they seemed subdued by the gravity of the situation. The charges are serious, Mr. Wellington, his lead counsel, Sir Geoffrey Pemberton QC, explained during their morning meeting. The Crown Prosecution Service is taking a very hard line on this case. But it's ridiculous. Marcus protested. All I did was talk to a tour guide. That's not how the law sees it, Sir Geoffrey replied patiently. You assaulted a serving member of Her Majesty's forces while he was on duty. You caused a breach of the peace at one of Britain's most important cultural sites. And you did it all while recording yourself for social media, which shows premeditation. Marcus felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. What are we looking at? If convicted, you could face up to 6 months in prison, a substantial fine, and immediate deportation with a lifetime ban on returning to the UK. More immediately, your visitor visa has been suspended pending the outcome of the case. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. His company had millions of dollars worth of contracts in Britain. His personal investments in London real estate alone were worth tens of millions. A lifetime ban would be financially catastrophic. There has to be something we can do, Marcus said desperately. Money is no object. Whatever it takes. Sir Geoffrey looked uncomfortable. I'm afraid this isn't the sort of case that can be resolved with financial settlements, Mr. Wellington. The viral nature of your behavior has made this a matter of national pride. The government cannot be seen to go easy on foreign visitors who abuse British military personnel. Meanwhile, outside the police station, James Crawford was holding an impromptu press conference. Word of Marcus's arrest had spread quickly, and several news outlets wanted to hear from the guard who had been victimized. James was still in his civilian clothes, looking every inch the professional soldier even without his ceremonial uniform. He spoke clearly and calmly to the assembled reporters, his military bearing commanding respect from everyone present. I want to be clear about something, James said, looking directly into the cameras. This was never about personal revenge or hurt feelings. This was about maintaining the dignity and respect that every person deserves, regardless of their position in life. The reporters hung on every word. Here was the other side of the story, the humble soldier who had endured abuse with dignity and was now speaking truth to power. Mr. Wellington seemed to think that his wealth gave him the right to treat me as less than human, James continued. He was wrong. Money doesn't buy you the right to humiliate others, no matter who you are or where you come from. One reporter asked about Marcus's claims that the arrest was politically motivated. "I think the real question," James replied, "is why anyone would think that foreign visitors should be allowed to abuse British military personnel without consequences. This isn't about politics or international relations. This is about basic human decency." Another reporter asked if James felt vindicated by Marcus's arrest. "I feel satisfied that justice is being served," James said carefully. "But this isn't over yet. Mr. Wellington's arrest is just the first step in holding him accountable for his actions." The cryptic nature of that last comment wasn't lost on the assembled press. There was something in James's tone that suggested more consequences were coming, though he wouldn't elaborate on what they might be. Back in his cell, Marcus was discovering that British prisons were very different from the luxury accommodations he was used to. The mattress was thin and uncomfortable, the food was barely edible, and his cellmate was a career criminal who seemed to find Marcus's situation highly amusing. "So you're the rich American who picked on the Queen's Guard," the man said with a thick Cockney accent. "That was a stupid thing to do, mate. Those boys don't forget, and they don't forgive." "It's all a misunderstanding," Marcus insisted. "My lawyers will have me out of here by this afternoon." His cellmate laughed. "That's what they all say. But you don't understand how things work here. This isn't America, where rich blokes can buy their way out of trouble. You've pissed off the wrong people." As if to prove his point, a guard arrived to inform Marcus that his bail application had been denied. He would be remaining in custody until his trial, which was scheduled for the following week. "This is outrageous," Marcus protested. "I'm not a flight risk. I'm a respected businessman." "That's not how the magistrate sees it, sir," the guard replied. "Given the serious nature of the charges and your resources, you're considered likely to leave the country to avoid prosecution." The news that bail had been denied sent shockwaves through Marcus's business empire. Wellington Tech's stock price began to plummet as investors lost confidence in a company whose CEO was sitting in a British jail. Board members held emergency meetings, trying to figure out how to manage the crisis. But the real damage was being done to Marcus's reputation. The videos of his behavior at Windsor Castle had been viewed millions of times, sparking outrage around the world. #JusticeForJames was trending globally, with people sharing stories of their own encounters with entitled wealthy Americans. Major corporations began quietly canceling contracts with Wellington Tech, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Political figures who had once courted Marcus's support suddenly found themselves too busy to take his calls. Most damaging of all, Marcus's own employees began speaking out about their experiences working for him. Former assistants, security guards, and service staff came forward with stories of verbal abuse, impossible demands, and cruel behavior that painted a picture of a man drunk on his own power. The British tabloids had a field day with the story. "Yank Tank loses his marbles," screamed one headline. "Billion-dollar bully gets his comeuppance," declared another. Even the serious broadsheets covered the story extensively, treating it as a symbol of wider tensions between old-world respect and new-money arrogance. James, meanwhile, was being hailed as a hero. His dignified response to abuse, his military bearing, and his humble press statements had captured the public imagination. Donations poured into military charities in his name, and he received thousands of messages of support from around the world. But James wasn't content to rest on the sympathy of strangers. He had bigger plans for Marcus Wellington III, plans that would demonstrate the difference between real power and the mere illusion of power that came with money. The first hint of what was coming arrived at Marcus's law firm in the form of a civil lawsuit. James Crawford was suing Marcus for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation. The lawsuit sought not just monetary damages, but a formal public apology and a commitment to donate to military charities. Sir Geoffrey was flummoxed when he read the filing. "This is highly unusual," he told Marcus during their next meeting. "Military personnel rarely pursue civil action for incidents that occur while on duty. So fight it," Marcus demanded. "Countersue him for harassment or something." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Sir Geoffrey replied. "The young man has representation that suggests this case has backing from very influential sources. His barrister is Helena Blackwood QC, one of the most respected advocates in Britain." Helena Blackwood was indeed a formidable opponent. At 55, she had earned her reputation by taking on cases that others deemed unwinnable, particularly those that involved protecting the rights of ordinary people against powerful institutions. Her decision to represent James pro bono sent a clear message about how seriously the legal establishment was taking this case. "More concerning," Sir Geoffrey continued, is the financial investigation that seems to be starting. The Serious Fraud Office has made inquiries about Wellington Tech's tax arrangements in the UK. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. His company's British operations were complex, involving multiple subsidiaries and offshore arrangements designed to minimize tax liability. Everything was legal, but barely so, and sustained scrutiny could cause serious problems. They can't do that, Marcus protested weakly. That's completely separate from this ridiculous assault charge. I'm afraid that when someone becomes the subject of criminal charges, it often triggers reviews of their other activities, Sir Geoffrey explained. The authorities like to be thorough. Indeed, Marcus was discovering that crossing the wrong people in Britain had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate criminal charges. His business empire was under attack from multiple directions, coordinated in ways that suggested careful planning and powerful allies. The Home Office announced that it was reviewing all of Wellington Tech's sponsorship licenses for bringing foreign workers to Britain. The Ministry of Defense was reconsidering all current contracts with the company. The Financial Conduct Authority was examining the firm's investment products for potential irregularities. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each individually justifiable, but collectively devastating. Marcus was beginning to understand that he wasn't just fighting criminal charges. He was fighting a system that had decided he needed to be made an example of. But the most brutal blow was yet to come, and it would be delivered not by the British government, but by James Crawford himself. The devastating blow came not through lawyers or government officials, but through something much more powerful in the modern world: social media warfare conducted with military precision. James Crawford had spent his prison leave not just planning legal strategies, but studying his enemy's weaknesses and building an army of allies that Marcus never saw coming. On the 5th day of Marcus's imprisonment, James launched what military strategists would have recognized as a perfectly coordinated information campaign. It began at exactly 6 a.m. London time, when a new Twitter account called it Justice for Military posted a thread that would be shared hundreds of thousands of times within hours. The thread started simply: "My name is James Crawford. I am the Queen's Guard who was humiliated by Marcus Wellington III at Windsor Castle. Here is the full story that the videos don't tell." What followed was a masterclass in digital storytelling. James had written a detailed, emotional account of his experience that went far beyond what the viral videos showed. He described the feeling of helplessness as Marcus dropped money at his feet. He explained the military discipline that prevented him from defending himself. Most powerfully, he connected his personal humiliation to the broader disrespect shown to service members around the world. But James didn't stop with his own story. He had spent days researching Marcus's history, and he began sharing documented accounts of the billionaire's past behavior. There was the restaurant worker in New York who had been fired after Marcus complained about slow service. The hotel housekeeper in Los Angeles who had been screamed at for not arranging pillows to Marcus's exact specifications. The airport security guard who had been threatened with lawsuits for doing his job too thoroughly. Each story was carefully documented with screenshots, witness accounts, and public records. James presented them not as gossip, but as evidence of a pattern of behavior that demonstrated Marcus's character. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hashtag Marcus Wellington Exposed began trending worldwide as people shared their own stories of encounters with entitled wealthy Americans. But, more importantly, the thread caught the attention of investigative journalists who began digging deeper into Marcus's business practices. Within 24 hours, 3 major news organizations had assigned teams to investigate Wellington Tech's labor practices, tax strategies, and treatment of employees. What they found was damning. Marcus's company had a history of using unpaid internships that bordered on exploitation. Former employees came forward with stories of 80-hour work weeks, verbal abuse from management, and retaliation against anyone who complained about working conditions. Several women described a corporate culture where sexual harassment was ignored as long as the perpetrators brought in revenue. The most damaging revelations concerned Marcus's personal conduct with his own staff. His executive assistant had quit after he threw a coffee mug at her for scheduling meetings too close together. His former head of security had been fired after refusing to spy on other employees' personal lives. His private pilot had been terminated for objecting to flying in dangerous weather conditions. Each news story was worse than the last, painting a picture of a man who viewed everyone around him as disposable resources to be used and discarded at will. The pattern was clear. Marcus Wellington III was not just an entitled tourist who had behaved badly one day, but a systematic abuser of anyone with less power than himself. But James's most devastating weapon was yet to be deployed. On his 6th day in prison, Marcus received an unexpected visitor, his own mother, Eleanor Wellington.